But now to a sign of the madhouse that this country has become, an example of why Australians are getting poorer and fast. We saw yesterday the economy growing just 1% over the year, 1%, but our population by 2%, so we were getting poorer. There was actually a brawl today about this, a very polite brawl, but very important and extraordinary. The Governor of the Reserve Bank, Michele Bullock, she gave the Treasurer of this failing government a lesson in basic economics. Now, as you know, Treasurer Jim Chalmers has been going around blaming Bullock, the woman he himself picked as governor, for, quote, smashing the economy by keeping interest rates too high. Well, Bullock today wasn't putting up with that nonsense, even though she tried to play down this brawl or this war with the Treasurer.
The opposition leader has said today that you and the Treasurer are at war. Are you?
To ring the bell. He's doing his job and I'm doing mine. I wouldn't use those sorts of words.
So Bullock wouldn't use those words, but she would, and she wouldn't say anything directly about Chalmers, by the way, but she did point out that she was not smashing the economy. What was really hurting voters was the high inflation that is caused in part by the high spending of you-know-who. High interest rates hurt home buyers especially, but high inflation, that hurts everyone and hurts the poor most. I wonder if Chalmers remembers them. Here's Bullock.
I understand that people are hurting from high interest rates. I do understand that. But I think, as I tried to set out in the speech, it's actually high inflation that is really causing trouble for people, and it's causing trouble for the most vulnerable. It's affecting everyone. If we don't get inflation down, it's bad for everyone.
Now, I can't remember the last time a Reserve Bank governor had to publicly explain the basics of economic life to a treasurer. And in this particular war, I know who the baddies are. Joining me is our Thursday regular, Nationals frontbencher, Barnaby Joyce, the former Deputy Prime Minister. Barnaby, before I get to this brawl, Bill Shorten quitting politics, what does that tell you?
It worries me. It means that the moderate side of the Labor Party is dying, it's disappearing, it's been taken over by the radical left, it's run by the radical left. It's encapsulated best in their power policy as one, their position, their sort of ambivalence and confused position on Israel. Number two, just the social paradigm of gender neutrality and gender fluidity and all this sort of stuff that's become part of the lexicon. That's who's running Australia at the moment. I would commend Bill, although he does it in a Bill way, of at least attempting to try and put the NDIS back inside its envelope. It was completely out of control, and I do commend him working with Michael Sukkar to try and bring some sense, because we're just going to run out of money there. I'd say if we go back through Bill's history, he was formed by the fact that as a union rep, and he was a union rep, but he was actually a union rep out in the field. He was out in the field in the farming areas, out in the field in factories. He wasn't flying a desk straight out of university in the vain hope that as part of the Labor left, they would end up in politics, which is how most of them get there. And I think it's a concern, not just for the Labor Party, but for Australia, to see that the moderates, the people with their heads screwed on, are disappearing. The Bob Hawkes are disappearing from the Labor Party to be replaced
Martin
by
Ferguson's even, who was of the left, but
people
who had sense.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, Martin Ferguson, Gary Gray, Jenny George. I mean, the sensible Labor doesn't seem to exist apart from a few random examples that I better not name, otherwise they'll get frozen out too. Barnaby, you've been involved in politics for 30 years. You've been a politician for 20. When did you last see a Reserve Bank governor having to fire back at a treasurer trying to shift the blame onto them?
This week. It is, from the times of, Bernie Fraser and Glenn Stevens. There was probably commentary by the Fourth Estate on how Glenn was going, but this hostility between Michele Bullock, who part of my alumni actually, so part of the University of New England, same place Bernie Fraser came from, another Reserve Bank governor. She's an expert in economics. Chalmers is an expert in political science, and what we're seeing now is that political science doesn't match it in economics. And, Dr. Chalmers, the political scientist, Dr. Chalmers, has to realise that the core inflation rate in Australia is a concern. It's higher than New Zealand, for goodness sake. I mean, forget about Switzerland and everywhere else. It's higher than New Zealand. We have a real problem here in Australia. And if a block of butter costs you $4 and tomorrow it costs you $8, then you'll become poorer, right? If inflation puts things beyond your capacity to own them, to buy them, it means that you get less and less in your shopping bag for the same amount of money, or you have to pay twice as much money to get what you shopped for 6 months, a year ago. So you're poorer. And Michelle's said that, the Reserve Bank governor said it. If you don't control inflation, the Australian people become poorer, and you are becoming poorer. And another massive driver of your poverty, as you're driven towards, many people towards poverty, like they literally, they're living in their car, that's poverty, is this insanity of the left, going back to the bill issue, the mad left and their desire for intermittent power. That is, I reckon that it just encapsulates lunacy. Just have a look at their power policy, have a look at the fairies at the bottom of the garden and the Peter Pan economics, and that is what is making you poorer. Thought processes and thinking like that.
Hang on, that's not the only thing. I think she was absolutely right in saying inflation hurts more people, and the poor in particular. And, that a Labor Treasurer doesn't know that is a disgrace. Exactly. But there's also something else making us poorer, this global warming agenda. In his last budget, Jim Chalmers boasted of spending $1 billion to get Australian companies to build more solar panels in Australia, even though there's a worldwide glut thanks to China's cut price ones. Here he is.
We're also boosting economic resilience and strengthening our supply chains, giving Australian firms the chance to manufacture more of the next generation of solar panels.
In fact, Barnaby, now we learn that these subsidies could actually go to foreign companies with no real obligation to do much in Australia. It's desperately trying to get someone to build solar panels.
It frustrates me so much. This insanity, you're going to make things in Australia. What your source, your seed stock, electricity and gas, the price is going through the roof. Your raw materials, your coal and iron ore, except you hate coal, is at international prices. It's an international benchmark. Your labour rates are higher, and I've got no problems with that. We want them to be higher than Bangladesh. Our advantage was power, electricity, gas. But this government is basically butchering it. It is saying it's relegating it to this insanity that we're going to run the made in Australia on a windmill. I mean, if you just sit back, if you got in a helicopter and looked at this from, 300 feet and said, well, they're going to try and run an economy on windmill and solar panel, that's insane. And you can say, yeah, it's insane. Look, it is insane. And
everyone's paying for it.
Well, yeah, and he'd go and he'd listen to the Swami dancing, prancing Mr. Bowen with his beautifully coloured ties and his rather tight shirt, and he's he actually thinks he's fixed it. It's like an alternate universe. It really is.
But that's exactly.
They've all got their green glasses on.
That's exactly how I feel. No, Barnaby, you've got it. It's an alternative universe. I mean, I barely understand what's going on, and I think increasingly voters are waking up to this. This is just a mystical, magical tour they're being invited to take to a land that doesn't really exist, operating laws that actually don't work.